At the end of the 19th century, German critics didn't know how to describe this painting without resorting to revulsion. Some wrote that it looked like an eternal wake. Others said the image produced a silence so aggressive it felt wrong to remain in the same room with it. One newspaper even suggested the work should not be displayed in homes with children. Another called the painting a visual invitation to death, not because there was blood, but because everything in it seemed already dead. And yet, this image ended up hanging in nearly every home in Berlin, and later in a private office frequented by a man who would turn aesthetic obsession into historical catastrophe. Today it is known as the Isle of the Dead, but the painter never wanted that name, and perhaps never wanted anyone to look at it for too long. Now, move closer. Ignore the island entirely. Ignore the sky. Ignore even the cypress trees. Look only at the boat. Notice the motionless figure wrapped in white. She does not row. She does not say goodbye. She does not look back. And now observe the detail that made critics recoil from the canvas, as if they had touched something too cold. The coffin is already inside the boat. So the question is not, where are they going? The question is, why would someone choose to paint the arrival instead of the departure? And why, decades later, would this specific image become Adolf Hitler's favorite painting? At the end of the 19th century, death was not something meant to be displayed. It existed, of course. It was everywhere. Epidemics, child funerals, recent wars. But there were unwritten rules about how it was allowed to appear in art. Acceptable death was allegorical, distant, almost polite. Angels, celestial light, the idealized body. Nothing that suggested decomposition, nothing that implied permanence, nothing that made the viewer feel that this was not a story, but a destination. The European bourgeoisie wanted visual comfort. Paintings meant to elevate the spirit, not force it to stare into a mirror. It was in this world that Arnold Böcklin decided to risk everything. Böcklin was not a cheap provocateur. He was a respected painter, technically accomplished, trained within the academic tradition. But he carried a quiet obsession that did not belong in well-lit salons. Death not as an event, but as a state. He did not want to paint the moment of the end. He wanted to paint what comes after, when there is no drama, no witnesses, no redemption, only silence. That gamble did not come from nowhere. By that point in his life, Böcklin had buried more children than most people can imagine. 8 of his 14 children died before him. Illness was constant, physical pain as well. His own body was beginning to fail, especially the arm with which he painted. While the world expected pleasant landscapes and decorative mythology, Böcklin began painting what no one wanted to hang on their walls. He was not seeking scandal, he was seeking truth. And that is exactly what put him on a collision course with the society that sustained him. Because when the Isle of the Dead appeared, it offered no comfort, it promised no heaven, it suggested no return. It showed something far more disturbing, a place where death does not happen, it continues. And at that moment, Böcklin still did not know that he had just created the most uncomfortable image of the century. An image that would outlive him, pass through wars and eventually be admired by people who would turn the cult of death into state policy. The painting was not made to shock, but the world was not ready for what it revealed. And perhaps it never would be. When the Isle of the Dead is finally revealed, there is no immediate impact. There is no shock. There is no explicit horror. What exists is something worse. The first sensation is calm. A calm that is too smooth. The water does not move. The sky does not threaten. Nothing seems to be happening. And that is exactly when the painting begins to unsettle you. At the center of the scene, a rocky island rises from the sea like an ancient body no one ever managed to bury properly. It is not exuberant. It is not welcoming. It feels closed, as if it was never meant for visitors. At the top, dark cypress trees rise in dense columns. There is no wind, there is no movement. They are funerary trees, planted not to grow, but to watch. Carved into the rock, rectangular openings appear. Doors, niches, funerary chambers cut directly into stone. These are not romantic ruins. They are functional spaces. But Böcklin does not want you to stay there for long. He pulls your gaze toward the water. From the lower edge of the canvas, a narrow boat emerges. No ornaments, no flags, no identity. The boatman rows with his back turned to us. His face is invisible. He does not react. And then you see what truly matters. At the bow, a rigid white shape wrapped in heavy fabric. This is not just any cargo, it is a coffin. The white is not luminous. It is opaque, cold. A white that reflects no life. Standing beside it is the most disturbing figure in the painting. A human silhouette entirely wrapped in white. No face, no gesture. She does not move. She does not say goodbye. She does not resist. She accompanies. Critics of the time became obsessed with this detail. Some said it was a soul, others a widow, others death itself. But no one could explain what was most unsettling. This figure is not being taken by force. She has already accepted it. And then comes the detail that dismantles any romantic reading. The boat is not leaving the island. It is arriving. Böcklin does not paint the farewell. He does not paint the drama. He paints what comes after, when everything has already been decided. That is why the painting feels so silent. There is no conflict, there is no choice, there is no return. Death here is not a tragic event. It is a procedure. And this was Böcklin's first great violation. He turned the end of life into something administrative, without transcendence, without visible hope. For the public of the time, this was not symbolic art. It was a moral error. Because when you look at that canvas, there is nothing to admire, only something to accept. And this cold acceptance did not come from Böcklin's imagination. It came from a real request, because that white coffin was not part of the original design. It was placed there at the demand of a woman who needed somewhere to put her own grief. If this story is already making you uncomfortable, it's because you're looking in the right place. So take a moment now. Leave a like. It tells the algorithm that this kind of investigation deserves to keep existing. And if you want more stories where art is not decorative, but dangerous, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay tuned for what comes next. Here, the frame is never the problem. The problem is what's behind it. That cold acceptance did not come from Böcklin's imagination. It came from a real request. The woman connected to the white coffin was named Marie Berner. She was not an artist. She was not a critic. She was not part of any symbolic or philosophical circle. She was a widow. Marie had lost her husband years earlier, the victim of an illness that, at the time, still carried the weight of an inevitable sentence. When she enters Böcklin's studio in Florence, she is not looking for art. She is looking for a place. Not a physical place, but a space where grief could exist without needing to be explained. In the studio, Marie sees a painting still unfinished, an isolated island, a motionless sea, a scene that already seemed to exist outside of time. She recognizes something in it. Marie commissions a version of the work for herself. But she imposes a condition. She asks Bucklin to add two elements that were not part of the original design: a white-covered coffin and a standing figure wrapped in a shroud. She does not ask for a portrait. She does not ask that the figure be her. She does not ask for representation. What she asks for is harsher than that. She asks for loss, to have a body. With this demand, the boat ceases to be mere allegory. The crossing ceases to be just myth. The painting begins to carry something too concrete to be ignored, a destination where someone real could place someone real who had died. Bucklin accepts, and in that moment, the work crosses an invisible line. It stops being merely a symbolic image and becomes an object of private mourning. But the world never respects mourning for very long. The painting begins to circulate. It is seen, discussed, reproduced. And then the man who truly alters the fate of the work enters the story. The dealer. He is the one who gives the painting the name Bucklin never chose. The Isle of the Dead. Not Island of Rest. Not Island of Memory. Dead. The title strips the work of its intimate character and turns a widow's silent grief into a marketable concept. And it works. Reproductions spread across Germany, first in cultivated salons, then in bourgeois apartments, then in ordinary homes. The image stops being private. It becomes domestic. People hang the painting on their walls the way one accepts living with something they do not understand. Not to decipher it, but to tolerate it. Decades later, one of these versions reaches the hands of a man who did not see death as an end, but as a language. Adolf Hitler was not interested in art as consolation. He was interested in art as a statement. Among landscapes and heroic scenes, this was the image he chose to keep close. An island with no return. A boat that only arrives. A death without drama. What began as a widow's silent request ends up hanging in spaces of power. Private mourning becomes ideological symbol. Individual pain becomes historical fetish. And this is the true taboo the painting exposes. Not representing death, but allowing it to be appropriated. Because when an image accepts absolute silence, it can be used by anyone who wants to turn absence into authority. From the moment the painting stops being merely an object of mourning, it begins to exact a price. For Bucklin, success does not arrive as redemption. It arrives as distortion. The work spreads faster than any explanation could follow. Reproductions circulate without context, without letters, without silence. What was once an intimate request becomes an image for consumption, and the artist loses control of what he created. Critics begin to treat the painting not as a symbol, but as a moral anomaly. It is not called beautiful. It is called sick, monstrous, disturbing. Not because it shows something forbidden, but because it insists on something no one wants to resolve. Death without transcendence. Bucklin starts to be seen as someone who went too far. Not an elegant provocateur, but a man obsessed with themes that should not dominate respectable art. Meanwhile, the artist's body continues to fail. The pain in his arm worsens. The act of painting becomes extreme physical effort. Depression deepens. There are reports of periods when Bucklin simply disappears. He flees, he moves, he searches for air, he searches for silence, and still he repaints it. Again and again. Each new version feels less personal and more rigid, more definitive, as if the artist were trying to close something that refused to end. The peak of this distortion comes when the painting enters a new kind of space. No longer homes, no longer salons, spaces of power. When a political leader chooses this image to remain at his side, the meaning of the work shifts irreversibly. There, the painting is no longer seen as mourning. It is seen as affirmation, an inaccessible island, a one-way crossing, a death that is organized, silent, without emotion. And it is precisely here that the obsession is explained. Hitler did not like the painting only for its beauty. He liked its function. He saw in the Isle of the Dead a mirror of his own ideology. Death, not as human tragedy, but as a bureaucratic, silent, inevitable destiny. What was contemplation for Bucklin becomes a model for others. And this is the darkest point of the story. The work was not created to glorify death, but it comes to be admired by those who understand death as a necessary destiny. At this point, what the artist meant no longer matters. Control is lost. The image survives. The author does not. And when an image reaches this stage, it no longer belongs to the artist. It belongs to history. Time did what no artist can ever control. It separated the work from those who tried to use it. Today, the Isle of the Dead no longer hangs in offices of power. It is not hidden in private residences. It no longer witnesses decisions made in silence. It is in museums, lit, catalogued, exposed to the public eye. The same image that once occupied spaces of absolute authority now belongs to corridors where no one rules anyone. It is no longer an object of fetish. It is a document, and perhaps that is the painting's greatest redemption. Because dictators pass, regimes fall, ideologies rot, but the work remains. There is still an irony impossible to ignore. One of the 5 versions of the painting was destroyed during the Second World War, reduced to ashes in a bombing raid. The war that devastated Europe was led by Adolf Hitler, the same man who admired that image of eternal silence. The death he once contemplated as aesthetics returned as real fire. Today, of that lost version, only a black and white photograph remains. A shadow of what was already a shadow. Perhaps this is the cruelest form of historical justice, a painting about death being killed by humanity's own obsession with it. And still, the other versions survived. They crossed the century. They crossed scandals. They crossed acts of appropriation. And they remain there, silent, immobile, indifferent to those who observe them. In the end, the Isle of the Dead did not triumph by explaining anything. It triumphed by resisting final interpretations, resisting control, resisting power. Now the question is no longer historical. It is personal. When you look at this painting, do you see comfort or threat? Do you see rest or permanence? Because the island is still there, the boat is still arriving, and the silence remains intact. The only thing that changes is who is looking. If you made it this far, it means that gaze did not make you turn away. So do this. Leave a like. Subscribe to Behind the Frame. Turn on notifications. Because every week, we open files that museums would rather keep closed. Scandals, silences, and artworks that still watch those who dare to face them. Official history always looks clean. The real one almost never is. See you with the next case.